Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Oindrala, and I welcome you to this month's webinar on importance and benefits of systems, processes, and controls. This webinar is presented to you by MyCFO in association with Ascent Foundation. Before we begin, I request all of you to please put your devices on mute to avoid any background noises during the session. Kindly note that you may ask your questions during the Q&A session by writing down your questions in the chat or message panel of this platform. Conducting today's session is Mr. S. Venkat. I take immense pleasure in introducing him to you. Venkat is a qualified chartered accountant, cost and management accountant, as well as a risk manager by qualification, and an entrepreneur and a category creator by vocation. Venkat is co-founder of MyCFO, India's largest and fastest growing service provider of CFOing and finance effectiveness solutions. At MyCFO, Venkat has built and led a team of 180 team members on roles and over 1,000 personnel servicing more than 350 clients in 6 Indian cities and 8 countries, including the US, UK, Middle East, Nigeria, Russia, and the South Asian market. He has been actively involved with over 65 PEVC funds and their portfolio companies. Venkat's motivation is to leverage skills in the finance and accounts domain to assist business owners and investors to scale up and monetize their businesses. He has worked with promoter groups and managements across industry verticals, business sizes, stage of growth, and has a variety of business and finance situations. Prior to starting MyCFO, Venkat was Director, Finance and Corporate Affairs at the India subsidiary of Hines, one of the largest privately held real estate developers in the world. He has also been CFO at the India subsidiary of Aon, the world's largest reinsurance broker. Venkat did his articleship and early career at PwC, the world's largest professional services firm. Thank you, Venkat, for conducting this session for us today. Over to you now.
Thank you very much, Oindrala. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here again on the Ascent Forum to bring to you yet another webinar, this time on the importance and benefits of system, processes, and controls. So without much ado, we'll jump straight into this. The objective of this webinar is to leave behind some implementable ideas on how you should be thinking about building IT systems, streamlining processes, and institutionalizing controls in your business in an efficient and effective manner without making it bureaucratic. So what are the 5 takeaways from today's webinar? First, we'll share a few examples of why not having good systems, processes, and controls, which is shorten that to SPC, cost real money to businesses. We'll see what are the building blocks of good systems, processes, and controls. We'll address a question of whether you are actually ready for the ERP in your organization. And thank you very much for those who actually wrote in with your questions, because it helped us to tweak and fine-tune our presentation a little bit. So I do hope that this will be helpful to you. Several of you had asked questions about how do we know whether we are actually ready for an ERP or not. So we included a slide on that. And we thought we'll include some tips on implementation of good quality systems, processes, and controls. Like always, we'll leave behind some resource tools for you. So typical problem statements, and these have been culled from actual experiences or conversations we've had with clients in the last maybe quarter or so. The first one is from a 4,000 crore import-based grain trading company. So they buy wheat from overseas and they sell it in the local markets. You're all probably aware that the Indian rupee has depreciated against the dollar quite quickly over the last 3 months' time. So in this particular company, they do not have a good quality tracking mechanism to monitor open trades and forex exposure. So the profits that were made in the last 2 years have been completely wiped off in the last 3 months, just because the mechanisms or the red flagging system that should have gone up when the company's exposures were increasing on the forex side were not as effective as what they should have been. The next example is a case where warehouse stocks and book stocks were not reconciled for 15 months. So this is actually a very young company. It's only 3 years old. However, when they did the cost count, the stock count, they found that there were shortages and they had to write off inventory to the tune of about 9% of revenues, which is quite significant, right? It's a 40 crore plant-based oil processing company. So a 9% equates to about a 3.5 crore loss. So again, fairly significant loss. So these are two examples of monetary losses that could have happened, but there are also several non-monetary, if I can call it that, problem statements. So the third one, for instance, is I'm sure a common refrain with several of you, that you're dependent on your people. You want to separate them from the company. You don't want to continue the relationship because they're not exactly performing to expected standards, but you cannot separate them because there is no alternative. So too much dependence on key personnel in a company. This is a 200 crore EPC company's promoter who was having a chat with me. And my sense is that probably 80% of today's audience can actually relate to this statement. The fourth one, again, I'm very sure that this is something that all of us are faced with. I'm stuck in office doing admin work. Every little thing comes to me for approval. So what can I do to make my life simpler? I need to have controls, but I don't need to necessarily exercise the control myself. So how does one go about doing that? So I'm sure many of you can relate to some of these problem statements. The bottom line is that the cost of not having proper systems, processes, and controls, it can either be in monetary terms or in efficiency terms, or it could be in the form of time loss. Systems, process, controls is not a finance or an admin matter, is very much a business issue. Right, so we thought we would share a framework with you. This is called the Gartner's Performance Management Model. And I'm going to spend 2 minutes in explaining how this model works, just so that you can map where your organization stands within this framework. So level 1 is organizations who are unaware about where they stand. Level 2 are organizations which are opportunistic. So they do what is required here and today in order to make the business work without necessarily planning for the future. Level 3 organizations are comprehensive organizations in the sense that they're somewhere midway in the process journey. Level 4 are enterprise organizations, and these are organizations which have integrated operations with finance. They got agile systems implemented in these companies. They have got performance metrics which are automated. They have regular tracking of actuals versus the budgets. And they got a formalized approach to building company strategy. Level 5 are transformative companies. So these are companies that not only have access to existing data, historical data, they got highly automated operations, but these are data and not by gut. And there is very good alignment between execution and strategy. The reason why we thought we would show this framework is for you to think about where you stand. And this has got nothing to do with systems, process, and controls alone. It's got to do with the quality of your people. It's got to do with the stability of your business model. It's got to do with how well your strategy, mission, and vision has been drawn out. For any improvement to take place, you need to know where you are so that you can then create a path to where you want to be. From our experience, we find that most entrepreneur-run businesses, and the typical ascent target would be anywhere, say, between 10 to 200 crores in terms of top line. We find that most organizations are possibly in level 2. So the organizations are adequately scaled up that you're not worried about the day-to-day necessarily, but equally there is very little time left to plan for where to take the organization in the future. So it's very much a here and now opportunistic organization, but each one of you needs to make an assessment of where you stand independently. What we thought we would do is, and we are happy to circulate this presentation to you. In case you don't already have it, we'll make sure that we mail it to you. So please don't worry about taking notes of what is already written on these slides. This model has been built by Deloitte. a very large Big Four organization which does a lot of consulting and auditing and accounting work. We like this model because what it does is it allows you to earmark whether you are a stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4, stage 5 company on different parameters. So if you look at the left-hand part of the slide, you have some parameters like data, processes, people, strategy, and technology. And what you could do is to make a self-assessment of where your organization stands on each of these parameters, in which stage are you in. There is a definition that has been provided that will help you to determine whether you are a basic company, a developing company, a defined company, an advanced company, or a leading company. So just to take one example without delving too much into this one slide, is if you take a look at process, because that's the subject matter of our discussion today, a stage 1 company is where processes are not defined and are entirely manual, and there are no controls in place. Stage 2 companies are where processes are partially defined and are highly manual, so there's likely to be some automation, and controls are generally manual and they're detective. So what we mean by detective controls is that it's usually post facto. In case of a defined company, processes are mostly defined. So this is kind of becoming more formal now, but different levels of documentation. So you will actually see a written SOP or a written policy manual in some of the business processes. The controls are defined and they are also documented. So what the real change as you keep going ahead in the spectrum and you evolve into a stage 5 company is the level of definition and the level of automation and the level of documentation, which is what will be a common theme throughout the rest of this webinar as well. So as I said, the intention is not to kind of do a deep dive into every single parameter, but when we mail this slide presentation across to you, please do take a look and see where your organization stands. Once you have defined that, then a roadmap can be drawn as to how you can move from maybe you're a stage 1 or a stage 2 company, how do we kind of move to a stage 5 company. We haven't seen too many companies use the Gartner performance maturity model in the previous slide and the Deloitte organization maturity model that you're currently seeing. I mean, there's really no need to use two frameworks. In principle, they are more or less the same. You can choose which one you feel more comfortable with and just go ahead with it. So who's going to get the most benefit from this webinar? So if you are a business owner of an organization that has got no documentation or poor documentation of existing processes, if you're still reliant on Tally, or maybe you've got an ERP, but that ERP has been implemented suboptimally. If you are a medium-sized company, let's say between 20 crore to 200 crore in top line, if you're an organization that finds it difficult to attract and retain professional talent to man the position of head of department in your organization, if you're a business owner who is intimately involved in every aspect of their business, now we understand that as a business owner you need to be involved with every department, but question is at what level are you involved? Are you involved at a strategic level or are you involved at a micro level? So if you're involved at a micro level, I think you will get some benefit out of this webinar. If you are a business owner who is taken by surprise, so if there are events happening in the company that have completely caught you unawares, then I think this webinar could be of assistance to you. Apart from business owners, the CFOs of organizations that I've just described, who have been tasked, who have been told to implement good quality systems, processes, and controls, but maybe you don't have previous experience of having done such implementation, then you will also get a lot of benefit from this webinar. Now, for those of us who are probably beyond this phase, I need to call out upfront that the webinar may not be very useful to you. So if you have already got well-documented processes, you've got a functional ERP that's kind of meeting 80% of your requirements, if you've got a good quality delegation of authority, but maybe you're looking to kind of optimize this further, fine-tune this further, then please get in touch with us separately and we'll be happy to have a chat with you. But you may not get the most benefit from this webinar. So to jump in and get on with the details of how one goes about building this. And I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this slide and also show you some samples just so that you're clear about what I have in mind when I talk about some of these building blocks. So there are 4 key building blocks to building good quality systems, processes, and controls. So the first one is documented process flows. Now, a documented process flow needs to have steps. It needs to have dependencies. So who are the people who are responsible for other people's work to progress ahead? It will have a responsibility as to who is responsible to execute that particular task. And finally, TAT. TAT is a turnaround time for completion of any given process. The other building block of a good quality system, process, and control is a clear organization chart. Now, why is an organization chart important? Because end of the day, your processes have got no meaning unless they've got clear owners. And those clear owners need to be sitting somewhere in your organogram. The other part is when you talk about delegation of authority and implementation of controls, these controls again need to be assigned to specific individuals who are playing specific roles in the organization. So if your organogram itself is not very clearly defined, you will find it to be a challenge to implement systems, processes, and controls. Linked to the organogram is very clear job descriptions and clear KPIs. KPIs are key performance indicators. So what demonstrates whether an individual is actually doing a good quality job in a particular role or not is what the KPI will define. And finally, we'll see some samples of documented delegation of authority. So if everything in the organization comes up to you for approval, what is a way by which you can cascade the authority without losing control is what we will see as a part of this section as well. So I'm going to jump in and show you some examples of documented process flows. So this is the process flow that has been built for a large education services company. So they run a fairly successful chain of kindergarten schools. They've probably got about 600 such schools across the country. For those of you who are familiar with flowcharting, I'm not going to be spending too much of time. For those of you who are not aware of the basics of flowcharting, we're very happy to share this legend with you, just so that you understand what is the meaning of each of these symbols, right? But suffice to say that there are start and end points. The rectangles are processes and tasks. The inverted square is decision points. There are documents. Sometimes there are multiple documents that get generated at a particular point, and there are process connectors. So what this does, and this is an example of what we mean by a documented SOP. It goes beyond a normal flowchart. A flowchart would typically kind of take you through how the documents and the information flows in an organization. But one of the things you would see here is we have actually defined roles, right? So for example, here there's something called, so this is for generation of vendor masters in your ERP system. There is a role defined here called user department personnel. There's a role defined here called head of department, CFO, or director. There is a role defined here called PE, and there's a legend to say that the PE is a purchase executive. PM is a purchase manager. So if you are a purchase executive, it's very easy for you to simply do Control F, which is for finding words inside a PowerPoint document. Just run the search for PE and you know exactly what are the roles where you need to be involved. Our experience with SOPs is that increasingly nobody wants to read Word documents. So for some of you who are of my vintage, you'll probably be familiar with 200, 300 page spiral bound documents where SOPs used to be written. Increasingly, we find that companies don't want to go down that route because the world has become very visual now. So people need to understand very quickly what they need to do. They don't have the patience to read through long manuals. So a good quality SOP can be made visually, and this can be done either in PowerPoint or done in Visio. A lot of these are incidentally even available off the net where you could simply modify the processes and use it. We are again very happy to share some of these templates and formats with you just so that you're familiar about some of the SOPs in more commonly used business functions, like say purchase, for example, or bill passing and payment, or maybe invoice generation, or maybe a purchase acquisition. I mean, these are extremely simple processes that tend to be more or less similar across organizations. So happy to share these formats with you. Right. I think the important thing as we go along is, so this is actually a continuation, okay, of the vendor master creation process. The reason I thought I would pick it up, and we're not going to necessarily, there won't be too much value in going through every step here. I mean, that's not really the objective of today's webinar, but the objective is definitely to tell you what is the level of detail that is involved, right? And SOP is only as useful as the level of detail to which it is defined. So if any individual step has got more than one owner, I think it has straight away got a problem, because the accountability cannot be fixed on one individual. So it's absolutely critical to kind of break your entire process flow down into extremely simple, very fundamental individual steps where responsibility can be assigned to a specific individual, a specific role, right? So which is the objective of showing you this. Now this, what typically when you start analyzing what the process flow is, you will also discover that you need to make some changes. So for those of you who haven't carried out a formal SOP drafting exercise, or maybe you carried it out 5 years back and now there is a need for you to revisit it and redraft it, you will find that there are several gaps. Right? So typically what you should be getting out of a review exercise is a gap analysis. And then what you can do is to use a different color, like we have used the color green here, to show what are the new steps that are going to be introduced. So if your organization has got a legacy and people are trained to doing things in a certain way, how do you explain to them how the new process will work? So we tell them, look, blue is what the way it was being done in the past, and green is the way in which it is going to be done in the future. So these are additional steps that have been brought into the same process of vendor master creation. So similar thing has been drawn up here, say for IT master creation. Again, a revised process to do it. This is something on inventory management, where clearly you will find that the roles are now slightly different, right? You've got the warehouse manager, you've got the procurement teams getting involved, you've got the sales business head getting involved. So each process would have different team members who are going to get involved. Again, you see in the different color, the new way in which the process is now going to be implemented and run. Right? We would not recommend very frequent changes to the process flows. Typically, once you have established these processes, then I would imagine that doing a revision maybe once in 12 months should be adequate in the organization. But if you do not have documented SOPs, I think it's a good idea to actually get a process mapping done once. I think most of it we find that organizations have got internal capability to be able to map this at the right level of detail. We move on now to the next item as a building block is a clear organization chart. Again, I'm going to show a couple of examples here. I'm sure all of you are familiar with basic organograms. What we thought we would show here is a matrix organogram, right? And this again is increasingly coming into vogue. I'm going to take a minute so that you understand the concept of a matrix organogram and how individual responsibilities can be assigned at a very specific level. This is a commodity trading company. What we have in this row are some functions are defined at a group level, which is where my cursor is. And then here you've got the individual legal entities, right? So there are 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 legal entities, and there is a group function. Within that, there are SBUs. So there is something called a trading SBU, there is a processing SBU, there's a CMU SBU. Within that, there are locations. So there's Mumbai, Kolkata, Khopoli, Ahmedabad. So I'm sure that many of you will be very familiar with a classic challenge in drawing up an organogram is to make a decision as to how you want to get organized. Should you be getting organized on legal entity lines? Should you be getting organized on SBU lines? Should you be getting organized on geography or city lines, or should you be getting organized along functions? So what we did is to draw up. So the typical thing that you see on a PowerPoint chart, we find in most cases is not adequately detailed to help you implement a good quality system, process, and controls. So we picked up finance as a function in this company, and we are now drawn up a matrix which says that within finance, if let's say banking and insurance is an area, we have split this down into individual tasks, right? So bank reconciliation, facility management, and insurance are the subdivisions of banking and insurance. Business planning and budget, process evaluation, monitoring, cash flow, and this kind of keeps going down. And I'm going to quickly scroll down to again give you a sense of how detailed just one organogram on only the finance department of a company can be, right? I mean, we are now at row number 65, 66, at about 70. So probably there are about 45 to 50 line items here where individual responsibilities have been fixed. And these have now been mapped to a combination of legal entity, SBU, and location. And individual names have been put in. So somebody like Bhavin, for instance, who is responsible for facility management, he is responsible for this at a group level. So it kind of cuts across all legal organizations. However, if you look at something like a bank reco, it's kind of done by individual people for every combination of legal entity, SBU, and city, right? So the idea of sharing this with you is just like in the case of the visual SOP is to drive home the point that these exercises need to be carried out at a very, very granular level of detail for you to have any chance of a good quality system, process, and control to be successful in your organization. A third aspect is job descriptions and KPIs. I'm actually not going to spend too much of time on this because I'm sure that this is probably one thing that most of you would have in place. Nevertheless, to quickly take you through a sample of, take a look and see, show you. Right, so this is the JD written out for the CFO of a hospital chain. Very clear in terms of the job title, the location, department, whom it reports to, what kind of gender we're looking for the candidate, the salary, number of working days, the age, and very clear definition on what the role would contribute to the company. Very clearly laid out responsibilities and duties. Again, the idea is to show the level of detailing that needs to go in to specify what a particular role will entail and what you're looking for in the candidate, right? Both in terms of education, experience, as well as skill sets. So without, this gets converted into the job description paragraph that goes into the employee's offer letter. So unless there is something that's available at this level of detail, it's very hard to hold people accountable to their area of responsibility. So I would like you to consider this along with the earlier point I was making about the organogram, that unless we have got a clear job description and a clear KPI for every individual, it's very hard to implement good SPC. The last one I want to talk about, and I want to spend more time on this one, is documented delegation of authority, because we don't see this at a lot of mid-sized companies. I'm going to share two samples on this one. So the first one, so a lot of times we find that business owners confuse delegation of authority matrix with signing authorities on checks. So the first thing I want to clarify is that these two things are not the same. When we talk about delegation of authority, it means who is allowed to take decisions on what. So let's take the example of sales as an area. And let's take something like credit limits, for instance. It's got nothing to do with check signing authorities. So typically, the person who would initiate the work on credit limits would be somebody like the sales head, and the reviewer would be the CEO. So how much credit to give to every customer typically gets decided, say, once in a year as a part of the credit policy. Every new customer who gets added on, you would take a decision before you send a shipment to the customer. But we have defined responsibilities as to who would be responsible for creating the document or taking the decision, and who's going to be responsible for reviewing that decision, right? We also typically like to define what is the frequency at which it will be reviewed. So if you need review the credit limit every quarter. That's what we need to do. We define the turnaround time, which is to say that if the credit limits are being reviewed every quarter, they need to be done within 15 days from EOQ. EOQ is end of quarter. Right? So it's very clear as to who is going to initiate it, who will approve it, and what is the frequency at which it will get reviewed. Right? To take one example, now let's say of say human resources, for instance. A typical challenge is annual increments, right? So if there are any annual increments which are going to be done beyond 10%, then who is the person who is going to be initiating this? Who is the person who will be approving this? And in some cases, we also have an external reviewer. So in this particular company, there was a venture capital fund who was involved, and we made sure that if there is any out of turn increment that is beyond an annual inflation of 10%, then it's an exception. So the investor had to come in and approve that particular expenditure. What we have also done is to provide, and this is again very standard as a part of the delegation of authority matrix, to attach values, right? So for instance, if it's a sales order, this is an example of who can sign off on a sales order. So if the contract value is below 5 lakhs, then the standard, if it's a standard sales order, the sales head and the CEO can sign off. But if it is between 5 lakh and 20 lakh, then the COO and the CEO need to sign off. So the sales head can no longer sign off on this one. If it is between 20 and 50 lakhs, the CEO and the CFO need to sign off. And it's above 50, then it's the CEO and the investor. So now what is the standard? And it's very important when you're implementing systems, processes, and controls is to make a rule that will cover 90% of the cases. It's very hard to make rules to cover for the exceptions. So the 90% of the cases is what we call as standard. So which means that the template terms and conditions are exactly the same. There is no discount being provided. The contract period is for less than a year, and credit period where the company had a 60-day policy. If you're going to sign off with a new customer where the credit period is below 60 days, that will still qualify as standard. A non-standard is anything other than standard. So for instance, if a customer is being offered any kind of a discount, it becomes non-standard. And if you look at the matrix here, for non-standard, there is a different matrix that needs to approve. So for instance, it could be a low-value contract. If it is standard, the sales head and the CEO approve. But if it is non-standard, then the CEO and the CFO need to approve. Then the sales head no longer has got the authority to do it. So to take a step back, I mean, can there be a standard delegation of authority across all organizations or across all industries? The answer is no. A lot depends on the trust level that you have in the individuals to whom these powers have been delegated. And that will clearly vary from company to company. So similarly, the level of seniority of a sales head in one company may not be the same as a sales head in another company. This is why the organogram becomes extremely important. So in any organization, when you start to design a delegation of authority, the values and the roles is one side of the equation. The second side of the equation is the trust levels that you have in the individuals who have been authorized to provide the sign-off. But do consider putting in place a documented delegation of authority matrix in order to reduce the load of documents that end up landing on your tables for approval. I wanted to show one more example of a delegation of authority, and this one is a lot more detailed. A typical area where we find a lot of risk and a lot of frauds is purchase. And all of you as business owners, I mean, know this better than anybody else, that there is the single biggest area that most promoters want to kind of stay on top of. So this is what we defined for a company on the purchase order and contract approval process for procurement or lease of goods and services, right? So this is the expenses that the company is incurring. You will find here that it's a lot more detailed, right? It's been divided into term of agreement and the amount. So you look at this, it's like less than 1 year, 1 to 3 years, more than 3 years. So when you're giving out a purchase order that has got more than 3 years, take a look at this, what I'm just going to highlight now, there are more number of people who need to sign off on this decision as compared to say something which is a short-term contract, something like this, which is a short-term contract for less than a year. It's only 5 lakh in value. So you will find that there is only one individual who needs to do the review. But in all cases, you will find that the people who initiate and review, which is this block, this is the people who initiate and review are always different from the people who approve, right? So the basic fundamental of any good quality control is that the maker and checker, the maker checker concept means that you've got two different people, one person who's doing the making and the second person who's doing the checking and the approval, right? The point here again being that you can determine based on, I mean, again, these parameters are very much subject to change from company to company, but in the example here, they are provided both a time range of commitment and a value range of commitment, basis which they have had different people in the organization who need to come in to review and approve the particular decision. Right? So let's flip back now to, so these are the fundamental building blocks. So when we start the implementation of a system, a process, a control, you want to go into an ERP, do not undertake the exercise unless these basics are in place. If you do not have these fundamentals in place, no matter what you do in building systems and ERPs, you will find that eventually it will fail. One of the questions that we got is about what are the choices that you have for ERPs and what are the parameters for deciding which ERP to go into. So these are 4 independent columns that we've got here. So typical ERP options, and this is, I would say, more or less in the ascending order of complexity here. So Tally is possibly the most simplest one to implement. We find a lot of Indian companies now moving to QuickBooks because it's perceived to have better controls as compared to Tally. TCS has got a small and medium business focused solution called Ion. Sage has got a reasonably good quality ERP. Ramco has been around for a while. They again offer ERP solutions for small and medium-sized companies. Now, among the larger ones, Navision and Accepta are both Microsoft products. JD Edwards is used by a number of manufacturing enterprises. Infor was owned by BAN, which I think has now been bought over by Oracle. And I think the toughest ones to implement are usually Oracle and SAP. Right? So you've got a very wide range of solutions. I mean, today, the one thing about technology is that there is no dearth of solutions. Earlier when people had to go in for ERP, the choices were either to go into Navision or SAP, but it's clearly no longer the case. You've got a very wide range to choose from. So what are the parameters that you would use in order to take these decisions? So the way to read this chart, please don't correlate Tally with complexity of operations. These are 4 independent columns. So under parameters, these are what you need to consider while making a decision of which ERP you want to go into. So first is the complexity. Second is the industry peculiarities. So we find some industries like, let's say, EPC companies or real estate companies, or maybe a food chain, a restaurant chain, right? These are very, very peculiar business models that require a different solution. So you may find that some of these standard products that are brought up over here may not necessarily be the best for you. Like especially for food companies, we find that the point of sale systems of a retail companies, the point of sale systems typically tend to be completely different from some of the ERP options that I have put down over here. Another parameter that you need to take into account is the number of simultaneous users. Simultaneous users means how many people are likely to be using this system parallelly at any given point in time. If there is a lot of real-time collaboration happening, where there are multiple people who are trying to access the system at the same time, then you probably need a higher quality or a more robust ERP to be implemented in your organization. Dispersion of units has got to do with the geographical spread of units. So if you've got remote locations, you've got different manufacturing centers, you've got different distribution centers. Let's say you're a distribution-led organization with C&Fs and distribution and warehousing points, you will find that Tally has got some limitations in terms of how much it can manage. So you will then be forced to go in for an ERP. The other aspect that we find is the criticality of integration between operations and finance. So a lot of companies use um, relatively more evolved or complex IT tools to manage operations, and they simply take a dump from there and then they do an integration into Tally. We've seen several companies do that. But equally, there are a number of companies who feel that that process is inefficient. They do not want to have any kind of manual intervention between operations and finance. So if you need a fully integrated operation, then there's really no alternative but to go in for the ERP. The scale of operations does make a difference. So depending on the number of employees who are kind of doing data entry and approvals in the system, and also the total number of transactions that you're putting through, as the scale increases, you will typically find that you would be forced to go in for an ERP. And this is not just in terms of number of vouchers or number of payments that you're doing. It could also be scale in terms of the number of products that you're having on the ERP. It could be the complexity of the BOM structures that you have. Typically, the more complex the BOM structure is, you will find that if you have to do costing, then some of these simpler softwares will not help you beyond a point. You will be forced to go in for an ERP. Anything to do with material planning, MRP. So if you need an IT tool to help you manage your planning and procurement, you will find that it's essential for you to go in for an ERP. If there are more interface with external systems, so let's say that you've got a large client, and if you've got a large client and the large client is on SAP, and they are now mandated that if you have to supply materials or goods to them, then you need to be on SAP as well, because they don't want to be sending you manual orders. They just want you to see an order that they send out on their ERP. You've got no option but to actually go in for an implementation of ERP yourself, right? So a lot of times we find that medium-sized businesses that are supplying to large companies are forced into the ERP decisions simply because their customers have kind of moved into the ERP. The budget is always an important point, although I do believe that the cost of technology has come down significantly in the last 5 years, including the cost of multiple ERPs. If you don't have a very big budget, then probably, but you still need to move beyond Tally. Then maybe someone like an Ion or a Sage or a Ramco could be a solution. If budgets are not a problem and you believe that the IT system is kind of absolutely critical from a business standpoint, then please do make the investment in a more robust ERP. And finally, and this is really more an HR angle, but something that all of you should be aware of, is the availability of talent also determines the choice of ERP. So one of the reasons why I think Tally is so popular in India is because it's very easy to get people who are very comfortable with Tally. Right? If you try and look for the number of people who are, say, comfortable with Ion, I mean, the population has definitely gone up as compared to what it was 5 years back, but the ratio is probably going to be like 1:20, right? So if you can get 20 people to do data entry on Tally, you'll probably get one person to do it on Ion. So I think as time goes by, finding that there are probably much better supply of talent on, say, things like Navision and SAP for sure, on Sage increasingly. So you may want to kind of think about the IT implementation, not just from a standpoint of process and robustness and integrity, but also from a standpoint of whether you're likely to get the team that can help you implement the ERP and run the ERP. What are the choices that you have with regard to hosting? The good part is that there are multiple choices now. So earlier, the only option that you had was an on-premises option. So you needed to have the server. The server was housed inside your head office, and the server needed maintenance, and it used to get very complex. However, you now have an option of either doing a public cloud or a private cloud, multiple options that are available. You typically find that most service providers would recommend hosting your ERP servers on Amazon Web Services. Payment, again, the only thing that was available to you earlier was a one-time purchase. So, getting into an ERP used to be a big upfront cost of maybe 1 crore, 1.5 crores, 2 crores even. However, what has been very good about availability of technology over the last 5 to 10 years has been the pay-as-you-go concept. So you simply pay a license fee on a per person per month basis that helps you to reduce the cash outflow on your technology deployment, right? So that's honestly, I think ERP choices is the subject matter of at least one full hour webinar. But since the topic was about systems, process, and controls. And we received a few questions on ERP. We just thought we will kind of squeeze in a slide in here. Again, as always, we are always available to kind of talk to you even outside the webinar. So if you have any questions, do not hesitate to give us a call. Very happy to come and take a look and help you decide whether it's time for you to implement an ERP, and if yes, then what is the ERP that you should be going in for. I think a general rule of thumb recommendation has been that try and go in for the ERP that try and go in for an ERP that has been implemented by other people in the industry, right? I think there's always safety in that, and try and work with an implementation partner who's already implemented the ERP in your industry, right? Because they would have gone through a certain learning cycle. You don't need to explain all of your requirements all over again to them. There's a certain track record. They would have made some mistakes. They would have learned a few things. I think it's important to work with people who have actually implemented an ERP for some other player in your industry. So what are the learnings that we have had with ERPs? Okay, so we have tried to kind of summarize our experience of having seen multiple ERPs and having worked with owner-managed companies. We have really struggled in some cases. In some cases, it has been a grand success. So what did those business owners do? Okay, what did those entrepreneurs do in order to make sure that they had a successful ERP implementation? So we got 10 commandments here. So first, do not implement the ERP until all your manual process flows are completely stable, right? A lot of people think that going straight to an ERP will help you to streamline things, which is not a wrong thought. But ultimately, what value you get from the ERP depends on how disciplined your team is. And the discipline has got nothing to do with having an ERP or not. If it's a state of mind. So if in the manual processes your team is not disciplined, believe me, they're not going to get any more discipline when the ERP comes into place. And in fact, it can be extremely complicated. We have come across multiple situations where team members have actually gone ahead and sabotaged ERP implementations because they felt insecure about what is going to happen to their jobs, right? So you have to first make sure that the organization is mentally ready to accept this. And I think the best way to make sure that happens is that you first get your manual processes, manual controls in place before you bring the ERP on board. The last thing we want is to go through an expensive investment and still figure out that you don't have the solution that you're looking for in the first place. ERP is not a technology challenge anymore. It is now a change management challenge. I think the beautiful thing about technology is that there is no limitation to learning, right? So technology companies have evolved very quickly. You look at something like an SAP or Oracle, they have learned from the experience of thousands of implementations. So the product has now been built. It's no longer a challenge to find a product that will meet 90% of your requirements. The challenge is about change, right? Which is links us to the third point, which is that technology adapts very quickly, but people's minds don't. So you may bring a Mercedes-Benz, but if you still have to drive in pothole roads of Mumbai, the experience is not going to be great. So the challenge is that you have got very good quality cars now, but you don't have the roads to ride them on. I think today the challenge in mid-corporate India is that technology is available, but maybe the people who are required to use them maybe haven't evolved as much as what they should have. The fourth point I think is quite important. We have seen multiple companies who really get lost in customization because they want the ERP to do exactly what they are currently doing. In my view, it's a wrong approach. The ERP is not just a technology tool. The ERP to me is a best practice solution. The reason why the ERP has been built is because there is best practice of past implementations which are now put into a software code. Is it better for us as an organization to go with the best practice, or do we want to take what is already best practice and then tweak it to make it suboptimal to meet our requirement? So when it comes to things like processes, it comes to things like controls, I think strongly recommend simply go with what the ERP is having. If there are tweaks required in reports, fair enough. If you're used to seeing information in a certain way, that's okay. That's not a big deal. I mean, most ERPs can give you a data dump that can be very easily written into the form of a report. You can automate it. But let's not tweak with the underlying process flows that the ERP comes with. So therefore, avoid customizations unless absolutely necessary. Customizations are not only expensive from money terms, they're also very expensive from a testing standpoint. So the definition of customization is that the ERP doesn't have it. They are writing a code specifically for you. Right now, once they write a new code, it means that you need to test it, which means that your team has to sign off. It also means that whenever the core ERP comes up with a new release, your customization will not get automatically upgraded because the customization was done specifically one time only for you. Right? So avoid customizations unless it's absolutely critical. ERPs are more affordable than what we think. However, beware of the time investment. I think today a good quality ERP, and I'm taking a bit of a risk here by throwing up a number, could cost you anywhere between say 8 to 20 lakhs, right? It's earlier it used to be about 50 lakhs, 60 lakhs in a mid-sized company to implement, and people used to say, boss, I don't have the budget. Today it has become a lot more affordable. However, I think what business owners continue to miss and miscalculate is a time investment. An ERP cannot be implemented without the involvement not of anybody in the organization, but of the HODs, because they are the people who understand the business. They are the people who need to tell how the process flow should be working inside the ERP, and you need to be there to lead this process. So let's be aware that the ERP may not be very expensive from a money standpoint anymore. However, from a time standpoint, it will require your involvement. 90% of all ERP projects, they see both a scope and a time creep. Okay, so it will be a 4-month project. You will typically find that it will end up taking 9 months, right? And the reason why the time goes up is because the scope has changed. And the reason why scope has changed is because requirement has not been very clearly defined upfront. So the reason why I showed some of the SOPs to you earlier in the webinar is to let you know, give you a visual idea about what is the level of detail you need to have when you talk to a technology partner to say, this is what I want the ERP to do, right? So therefore, requirement definition at a very granular level is critical. So feature utilization. Oh, the point number 8 again is important. Owners have to be seen as using the ERP to maximize the chance of success. If you're going to only make a statement that all of you have to use the ERP, and you yourself insist that you want to see a manual report, or you will not log into the ERP to approve what you're supposed to approve as per the delegation of authority, then the ERP has got very poor chance of success in your organization. So change always has to be led from the top. Feature utilization improves with time. Okay, so don't worry about extracting value out of every feature in the ERP on day one. Think of it a little bit like Word or Excel. Even today, nobody, even the most best Excel champion in your office, can really utilize more than 15% of all the features that are available in Excel, right? Because it's a vast program that has been written by Microsoft. Similarly, in the ERP, there will be a lot of features. Don't try and utilize all those features on day one. Focus on what you require. Make sure the migration happens smoothly. Once the migration happens, then you need to have a plan to utilize more and more features as you go along. But it's a process that will evolve. Don't try and do all of it in one go at the beginning of the project. And finally, who needs to lead the ERP initiative? It has to be either yourself as a business owner, or it has to be a business leader who is seen to be a senior individual in the organization who has to lead it. It cannot be left to your IT head to lead the project. Right, so that is a little bit on the ERP. We kind of wrap up now, and then probably there'll be time to take a few questions. So a few summary thoughts on what are the tips to implementing some practical systems, process, and controls in your organization. So the key principle is that there has got to be simultaneous improvement in people, technology, and process. You cannot improve your systems and controls only by looking at technology. Equal focus has got to be there on the people side and reskilling them as well. Owner managers, this is very relevant to you, are the best friend and the worst enemy of systems, process, and controls. Why are you the best friend? Is because you are best positioned to write the systems, you are the best positioned to document the processes. You will know exactly where are the risks in the organization, therefore what control should be in place, which is the reason why you are the best friend of the SPC. You're also the worst enemy of the SPC, because a lot of times we find that if you map the exceptions that have been made to a documented policy, 8 out of 10 times it will be because the owner manager himself or herself has actually crossed the line and made the exception. So you need to be disciplined to avoid breaking your own rules if you have to have any chance of making systems, processes, and controls work. The ERP is helpful, but it's not mandatory for good systems, process, and controls. In an ideal state, yes, you need to have an ERP. I think longer term, if you're scaling up your business, you want best in class, ERP becomes compulsory. However, a lot of organizations haven't still reached that point where their manual processes have been fully optimized. So Tally and Excel itself can do a lot. The first checkpoint is you need to be satisfied that you have extracted the maximum juice out of basic tools like Tally or Sage or QuickBooks and Excel. If you're past that stage, it's definitely a good idea to start thinking about an ERP at that point. So to reiterate, processes and controls, they need to be stable in manual mode before they can be IT enabled on the ERP. So let's try and optimize Excel and Tally till such time the team is mentally disciplined to adhere to processes. It does not matter where you start, right? A lot of promoters get quite frustrated because they're doing very well on the business side. They go out, they win clients. There's a lot of trust in the market. They're able to raise money. They're able to make profits. But when it comes to systems and processes, it's very frustrating. A, you don't like to sit in the office to do it. B, it doesn't look like a very complicated area, but for some reason, it never gets implemented. So it doesn't matter where you start, right? Like with everything else, and this is the point that we made in the previous webinar as well. I think it was on costing and pricing systems, that everything evolves and it'll get fine-tuned. But what you need is consistent and disciplined usage. Anything that you see on a disciplined basis, on a monthly basis, you will find that it will evolve, it will improve over a matter of time. So don't look at systems, process, and controls as a one-time effort. Maybe there is a one-time effort to take it maybe from a 20% level to a 80% level or a 70% level, but moving from 70 to 90 will take time. And one has got to be patient and disciplined and focused over a period of time. Right? So you don't need to be a champ in writing processes or in implementing systems. However, where we need the business owner or the business owner managers to be involved is in the continuous monitoring. You could have other people do it, but you need to take time, at least on a monthly basis, probably 2 hours, to take a look at the framework and see whether you're making the progress against plan or not. So this is a framework that has been shared by EY. Again, please don't worry about taking notes of this. We'll send you the slide deck. Take a look at the left-hand side, right? It's a time dimension. It's 6 to 24 months, and there is 2 years to 4 years. Look at the phases, right? So there is a current phase, there is a future phase, and there are some parameters. So there is strategic direction and decision support. There is a people and organization dimension. There is a process and policy dimension, and there is a technology and data dimension. What we were talking about today is about this section, which is the process and policy. The point I have made in the past in the webinar, and I'm continuing to make now on this particular slide specifically, is that you cannot look at this slice in isolation. You cannot look at this slice without understanding where this slide fits in with your overall technology plan, where does it fit in with your people plan, and where does it fit in with regard to your strategic plan, right? So a holistic view across strategy, people, process, and technology is required when you're embarking on your journey to implement good quality systems, process, and controls. Right? Thank you very much for that very patient hearing. As always, we will do 10 minutes of Q&A. We've got probably about 6 minutes left. There are a few Q&As that we have received, so I'm going to quickly go through those. Suggest a system for appraisals, please. Okay. So I think the good part about HR systems is that we have had a bunch of companies that have come up, and so we have had experience of working with a tool called Zing HR, that is ZING. We have had experience of working with another company called Easy HR, that is EASY HR. Both of them have got performance management systems that are automated. There are a bunch of other tools as there. I just want to, for the record, clarify that we do not have any kind of referral arrangement with any of the product companies. So while I'm giving out some names here, we are happy to share a broader list of names. This advice to you is completely objective. So please do check out these companies before you implement them. But we are happy to kind of recommend 2 or 3 tools to you. But honestly, I think there's more than enough supply of good quality appraisal tools and HR tools available in the market. Second question is, what is the best way best way company to get existing systems reviewed and get suggestions on how to use Tally ERP9, which is currently being used in the organization with better system. Okay, so so multiple ways to do this, right? I think we would be very happy as MyCFO to come in, take a look, and give you some inputs. What I like to do in these kind of situations is to break up the project into two parts, right? One is to come up and do a diagnostic, and the diagnostics deliverable will be an implementation roadmap. So the diagnostic will tell you where you stand, uh, what more can you do with Tally ERP9. If nothing more can be done with Tally ERP9, then what are the gaps that need to be addressed in the ERP? And then we can come up with an implementation program to say that in the new ERP that is being recommended, how those gaps will be addressed over a period of time. So typically this should be, say, 2 quarters to go live at least, if not 3 quarters. But very happy to kind of get involved. I'm sure there are several other players in the market as well. If all you're looking to do is to kind of get a report that tells you this is where you stand and this is what you need to be doing and this is the technology that will help you to get there. I can recommend at least a couple of organizations apart from MyCFO who will be happy to come in and help you with this. Third one, in case of business having a lot of cash transactions, what are some of the specific or unique steps we can take for internal controls? So we come across this problem all the time. Okay, so we have got one microfinance business where cash is being collected. We've got one, at least 2 or 3 restaurant chains where cash is being collected. We do a couple of jewelry chains where there is cash. We also do a couple of homestays. These are hostels where there are students who are kind of paying and they typically end up paying in cash. So there are multiple ways to do this, right? We have actually done some solutions in-house and we've done some outsourced. So there are several. So banks today offer a cash collection facility, okay, if the volume is large enough. So one way to solve this problem is by outsourcing it to the bank, right? And the bank is very happy to do this, in many cases even free of cost, because they get a chance to actually manage your overall banking relationship. So they're happy to kind of throw in the cash management solution as a part of the solution. If you're not getting enough interest from banks, then there are agencies which provide cash collection. And we have implemented some of these. We have gotten vendors to do this at some of the companies where they will basically kind of go to all the centers on a daily basis and they will deposit the money into the bank account at the end of the day and they'll give you a report, right? And typically you end up getting one report from your unit or branch and you get another report that comes from the third-party agency that is doing the cash collection and deposit. You can tally the two and you can make sure that there is no gap. So that's another way to do it. The third way we have done is that we have got in-house resources. So each party, each branch which is collecting the cash has got a target to make sure that they deposit the cash within, say, maximum 48 hours of its collection. And then that process isn't typically monitored by somebody in the finance team to make sure that the cash is actually being deposited in the bank or not. I think there's some pros and cons, obviously, with all these solutions. I have generally seen that it's probably better to outsource this because it's become very cheap to actually get an external agency to go out, do this, and provide you with a report that acts as a cross-check to what your own operating teams are currently doing. Then there is another question, how to decide between the CapEx and the OpEx model while purchasing ERP. Okay, so there is a concept called total cost of ownership, or TCO as they call it. The CapEx model, obviously the year 1 will be fairly large and year 2, 3 and 4, 5 will be lower. Whereas in case of OpEx, it would be constant for all the 5 years. Typically 5 years is a time period that most organizations use. So whatever is your cost of funds, you apply on both the models to see what is the discounted outflow that you're going to have in the models, and whatever is the lowest, obviously you can then go for that. So I wouldn't say that the OpEx is necessarily cheaper. We have had several cases where the total cost of ownership in the OpEx model is actually higher as compared to CapEx. So if funds are available, then it might not be a bad option to go in for the CapEx. But I think specifically to your question on how to decide, we have used discounted cash outflow models to make a recommendation to clients on whether to go for CapEx or OpEx. There's one more question here. There are several impediments to professionalizing an FMB, especially because of legacy way of managing staff and no template being available on the process of how to go about doing it. I understand that SPC would play a major role. However, can you in a nutshell explain in 5 or 6 steps to start the process how critical is to get professional help while doing so? Okay, so I think that to me, this really is the single biggest challenge, the biggest elephant in the room is how do you get your team to listen to what you want them to do, right? And I have found that unless the promoters are willing to change their way of doing things and they're actually willing to let go of some of their people, these initiatives are extremely difficult to implement on the ground. I think to me, always the first step starts by the promoters being convinced about the direction they want to take with regard to the culture of the organization. You need to be really convinced, and you have to stick to that plan, right? So if you're going to say that, look, in the next 3 years, we will not be a loyalty-led organization, we will be a performance-led organization. Once you've taken that decision, then the 3 years you need to really stick to that decision. You cannot go back. I think a lot of times cultural changes fail because promoters get nervous, right? Because when you make these changes, you won't get the right reaction from the team. Some people may leave you, and entrepreneurs lose confidence and they say, look, jo pehle chal raha tha wahi theek hai, no, let's go back to what we were doing earlier. I think you need to have a very high degree of conviction. The second part is that you have to align your entire reward mechanism around this. People have to be incentivized to do the right thing, and they have to be penalized for doing the wrong thing. So, which is why my point about KPIs is what really kind of kicks in. One of the reasons why a lot of family managed businesses are not able to implement this is because they don't have clear job descriptions. And the reason why they don't have clear job descriptions is because they want people to do multiple things. That is something that doesn't sit very well with good quality system, process, and controls. So the advantage that you have is that you will have a cheap labor force. You'll be able to extract a lot of value out of them. But the problem you'll always have is that there will be uncertainty with regard to the business outcomes. You cannot say for sure whether the work will get done as per the right time, as per the right quality or not. For you to make that shift from a loyalty-based system to a performance-based system, you will have to adopt a KPI-driven variable incentive policy. There will be, again, any number of HR professionals who can help you with this. If you need our help, again, as my CFO, we're very happy to kind of come in and do that for you. The last thing is about, is there a template that is available? Absolutely. I think a lot of these things are not. So good part about being a mid-sized company is that you're not the first organization in India to do this. There are multiple organizations who have done it in the past. Again, there are templates and tools that are available. So for sure, we could talk offline and discuss about how we can help you to go about doing this. Good. So that brings us to the end of the seminar. In fact, I find that I've probably overshot the time a little bit. I would like to thank all of you who have been patient and who have stayed right up to the end of the webinar. Thank you for sparing the time. As always, it's been a pleasure to have you. We look forward to hosting you again in our August webinar. I'm sure Srijit, Vandrila, Abhishek and team will be in touch with you to send out the details of the topic and other details. In case there are any questions that we've received from you that have not been able to answer now, we will get in touch with you separately to answer those questions. In the meantime, if you have any other questions that you want to write to us, please feel free. My email ID is right up here on the slide. Write to us and we are happy to stay in touch. Thank you so much once again for joining us today. Bye-bye.